Welcome back to the fourth episode in the second series of Coppers and Brass, series of programmes in which we've been looking at various issues in Irish traditional music that perhaps don't get seeing the light of day as often as I think they should, and others think they should as well. This episode is about boundaries in Irish traditional music, and I'm really delighted to have Eamon de Barra along with us. Eamon, you're very welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
We'll be coming back to Eamon shortly to hear about his views and experiences in this issue of boundaries in Irish traditional music. But let's have a listen to some other views as well.
Very often when we talk about these boundaries, we're talking about the sounds, we're talking about the instruments, we're talking about the rhythms. And I suppose Irish traditional music is based around rhythms and particular melodies and structures. And when people go tampering and experimenting with these, there are reactions to that. But I think it has also had a very positive influence on music. And some of the things that are now considered purist were once in themselves innovations. It's very interesting to hear people talk about a fabulous accordion player like Joe Burke as being a purist, when of course he was one of the most innovative musicians of his time, taking an instrument that before that had not been played in that way or in that tradition. We are sometimes slow to recognise where the innovation really is.
This guy, in all good faith, kind of turned around and said, I love traditional Irish music. I love the Pogues, and I love, river dance, and I love whatever it was. But it was the Pogues one that struck me. And I mean, I love the Pogues, don't get me wrong, and I'm not casting any aspersions on the Pogues, but it's not traditional Irish music. Even they would not argue that point, But this guy obviously thought it was traditional Irish music, and I think that's the problem with boundaries, is that they're slipping. Riverdance is a great example. Riverdance is a spectacular show, but people think that's traditional Irish music, and it isn't. It's orchestrated.
The negative of that is when you go away to other countries and you're playing that type of music to people, people have this perception that that is trad, that Celtic thing is trad, when it's not at all. So a lot of people actually and when they come to a session then over in Ireland, it's completely different. And I think that's a bit of a negative, because you're losing the traditional music then when you go to other countries. You've more variety of instruments in an orchestra. I'd say that's why Sean O'Reilly would have used an orchestra rather than going to just a session or anything.
He also has more control though.
More control as well, because he can be a conductor there.
I think one of the big things with talking about traditional music and looking at boundaries is that sometimes the boundaries can become barriers. And for many people, some people are lucky enough to grow up with traditional music and to grow up with that, surrounded by that. Many people don't grow up with that, and they may not discover it, or they may not even see ways into it until much later. They may come from other musical backgrounds, they may come with no music at all. If we set those boundaries very rigidly, they can never enter, and that's a loss to the tradition.
It's important to have that freedom to break the rules, because that's where your influences and your freedom to fuse music comes in. When you get that freedom, then you use it.
If purists stopped us from making our own music, we would still be singing, one line with 200 voices singing the same thing.
Yeah.
We'd still be singing monk chants, stuff like that. And without that progression, we never would have gotten, we never would have gotten jazz, blues.
Gila are a very out there band. They fuse everything. I think it's very African kind of music, isn't it? And they use the congos and
The djembe drums.
Stuff like that. And it's so different to listen to compared to trad. I'd nearly say it's more African and its own style rather than trad. I mean, that's
what I mean by the whole purism, just dividing.
Yeah.
It just causes all these branches.
Yeah.
These little things that just become their own little styles of music, but they all have this connection that they all came from the same place.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of young people who, there were pockets of them in places like Dublin and Belfast and out in the country and abroad that really kind of get it. They get this purist thing, and they're into, listening to Coleman and Cloran and McKenna and all those boys, and Peter Horan and Fred Finn and all those guys, and they would kind of study, that kind of music.
That's where I have a lot of respect for the purism, whereas I'm not a purist myself in any type of music. It kind of requires that the progression is, you know, we progress by experimenting with it, but if we experiment with it too much, what we had originally is gone.
Yeah.
So we need the purists to keep us on track on what it was, because without those purists, all of a sudden we're just playing this new style of music that has no relevance or connection to traditional music.
And certainly I see students here very regularly coming in with little or no experience in traditional music. We start with the basics, but we keep very open-minded to it. And by allowing them to bring their musical ears, their musical abilities, their desires into the traditional music space, they can explore it gradually. And then they can decide that if they like it, they can follow it further. But if I put up the boundaries from day one and started everybody with the same polka or the same little march, I think a lot of them may well be turned off it. So those boundaries do exist, but I think it's important to cross them from time to time to allow people to explore it. But certainly every so often somebody challenges the boundaries, and that can be a good thing.
Well, Eamon, that was some very interesting views from the young people of Dundalk Institute of Technology, and we'll debate some of those issues in a little while, but could we start off, you tell us a little bit about yourself and your own musical background and upbringing?
Sure. Well, I was born in Dublin, and my mother was born here, but my father is a Cork man, and her family, my mother's family, are all from Cork. So a lot of the influence is Munster. My musical influence, traditional musical influence, comes from my mother's side. Grandmother was a harpist, Roisin Nihay. My mother, Nessa Nihulma, she was a harpist. She is a harpist also, and my brother Cormac is a harpist. So there's 3 generations there. The music that they would have been focusing on a lot would have been the big songs, the big airs, whereas I would have learnt traditional music from my uncle Sean, who's my mother's brother, and he would have taught me the whistle and the bower on piano at the start. You know, give me a kind of a pointer on those things. And then I would have moved on to a lot of the traditional tunes, jigs, reels, that kind of thing.
And at an early stage you began to, you know, experiment or look beyond the basic structure of the tune itself.
Well, I suppose I joined a group called Cadenza with Robbie Harris, Toner Quinn, and Dave McFarlane. When I was about 14 or 15 and did my first gigs over in Bray, it was great to get a couple of quid, and we were experimenting with different rhythms from Eastern Europe and that kind of. I suppose with the influence of Planksty and Riverdance, we would have been playing around with similar influences of the Eastern European rhythm, 7/8s and 16/8s and all sorts of different formulations. And basically moved on from that to a group called Delos. And Delos was a group we were busking on Grafton Street. I would have learned a lot of how to play music that excited the audience, I suppose, playing with them, and moved on from that to a group called Slide. Slide, then we were experimenting with traditional music, taking rhythms, chords, that kind of thing, working within the traditional genre, and then and I've been playing with Damien Dempsey then up to now. So it's been a kind of slow shift between them, but very interesting.
Yeah. That experience of playing on the street and playing to a crowd, you know, reminds me of Johnny Doran and Travellers, and they had to force the music to be a little bit different, more colourful. Were you doing a little bit of that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you're playing for a crowd of people, you've got to please the crowd as well. And it's entertainment. That side of the music was entertainment. The side that we were doing with Cadenza would have been a lot of creative stuff, you know, that would have been working. Again, there would have been an entertaining side to it, but we were thinking more about the actual content of the music.
Well, Eamon, could I ask you maybe to demonstrate what this whole subject is about musically, because, you know, words are fine, but very often the music speaks for itself.
Sure. Well, I suppose when we're speaking about boundaries, what I'm going to play now mightn't seem like it has pushed the boundaries, but basically I heard this recording of Paddy Keenan that he did. He did a recording with Paddy Glacken called Dublin in the early 80s, and he played a tune called The Bunch of Keys, and at the time what he was doing was no, I suppose he was carrying on from Doran, from Johnny Doran.
Johnny Doran, yeah.
And he did his thing. Now I'm not playing the pipes, but I'm going to try to carry on from how Paddy influenced me.
Lovely.
And you can hear there's a lot of style in the tune, in his version of it, and he does really push the boundaries with his version. And I'll do a couple of little things that are mine.
Breathtaking, and I can see what you mean. There's an awful lot going on in there, and I would love to have the time to discuss it in more detail. But we'll take a little break now, and when we're talking about pipers, we'll go to the Cobblestones again, where we've been every week, and for some musical entertainment. And Ian McKeown, one of Ireland's foremost pipers, is going to play a few tunes for us now.
I'll play two reels, Lord Gordon's, which is Leo Rosam's version of it, and then The Braes of Busby.
Great piping there from Gay.
Absolutely.
Really good stuff. This whole area about what is traditional music and what isn't, unlike, say, the GEA, where you've got a governing body who can decide and determine how the game's played, and that's it, no discussion. There is no central place around traditional music and boundaries and what is traditional or not. You can be in a pub somewhere and people can be debating it in Ireland or in America, or you could be at a conference with a lot of academics and musicologists, and there's learned papers trying to determine where the edge and the origins are. Where is it for you, Eamon?
Well, I suppose traditional music is always changing. That's the nature of it. It's a living tradition. So what was traditional and considered traditional 30 years ago, now it's a totally different concept. For example, now you've got a lot of guitars, bouzouki, and different instruments that have been brought in. In fact, an awful lot of the instruments are borrowed from Western traditions.
Most of them are, really.
Most of them are. I mean, really, we can only say that the bodhrán, the harp, and the uilleann pipes are the way they're played and the style at which they're played. The bodhrán is played with a little stick, and the way it's played is slightly different.
Irish.
Uniquely Irish. You've got the Irish harp, the small little harp. In fact, it was the metal string one was really the Irish harp, and then the gut string, which is developed from there. But then you have the uilleann pipes. Again, there are little pipes from all over Europe. But the uilleann pipes are unique Irish thing. But the flute is a German, Austrian, French design, came over here. You've got the fiddle, another European Baroque instrument, you know, and the guitar is Spanish or wherever it's from.
So who's to say whether it's an Irish instrument
or not?
Yeah.
But the music itself is very similar in the way that it's very diverse, where it's come from, people's perceptions of it. Some people are very there's a very nationalistic view of traditional music. National music used to be called, or a folk music, or a traditional music. You know, it's how different names, and it really, I mean, it came from Scottish English music was called traditional. First
British
time
Army marching bands and garrisons.
But they only started calling it traditional in the 1760s or thereabouts.
Right.
So Irish traditional music didn't start getting called traditional music until around the 20th century. You know.
So when someone says that's not traditional, you know, what right have they to say that, or what influences, or can we all have a personal opinion and it doesn't really matter?
Well, I think what we need to be aware of is that it's only a traditional and a folk music when a lot of people actually play it. You know, so if the music makes it into the communitive circle of musicians, then it becomes the traditional music. But if there are certain tunes, for example, or takes on the music that sit outside of that, then until it's played by the general public, the folk or the tradition, like the traditional
musicians, you mean?
Yeah, like there needs to be a certain nucleus of people now. Who determines what that is another thing. But there does need to be a general circle of acceptance for a particular type of tune or the music, and then it becomes a traditional thing because there are enough people who are doing it for it to be a tradition or a folk thing. But apart from that, I think that's really as broad as it needs to be, because you can't, when you try to define exactly what it is, you lose sight of the substance of it, you know.
I sense, Eamon, we could go on for another couple of hours on this, but unfortunately time is up against it. We're up against time, and I want to thank you for really helping to throw some light on a very, very complex and difficult issue. Particularly your music was fascinating, and it's just an example of the youthful vitality that continues in Irish music, and you're making a great contribution to it. And thanks very much for coming in and helping us.
Pleasure, Tommy.
With that was Eamon DeBarra, and many thanks again to Eamon for helping us with a very controversial but colourful subject. Next week, our programme is going to look at the issue of competitions in Irish traditional music, and we will have Jackie Martin along, a woman who knows a lot about music and about competitions, and she'll have some very strong views, I hope, of her own. In the meantime, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy this evening's programme, the views expressed, and keep playing Slán Ó Bhaile.